I play amateur football in Montana and have been part of different teams. However, in a game back in 2014, things took a terrible turn for me. I suffered a severe injury when I got hit hard, and my leg was in excruciating pain when I woke up. One of the guys nearby mentioned the condition of my leg, indicating it was pretty bad. Little did I know, it was a complete compound fracture that required over a year to heal. My tibia had torn through my skin, necessitating immediate surgery to avoid losing my leg. After undergoing the surgery, I faced a challenging rehabilitation process to regain my strength and mobility. During this time, I gained a lot of weight and even struggled with pain medication addiction, which further complicated matters. In a span of about 6 to 7 months, I transformed into a completely different person, and it marked the lowest point in my life thus far. I knew it would be a difficult journey to return to playing football, but my initial goal was to lose the excess weight and rebuild the strength in my legs. However, I felt embarrassed to go back to the gym, although I realized it was an irrational concern. Instead, I decided to pursue an alternative form of exercise to get back in shape, and that's when I turned to hiking. I found a favorite hiking spot on a trail in the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, around 30 miles south of my hometown, but I would drive to a small town called Wise River and park my truck near a charming little saloon whose owner I knew quite well. From there, I would hike up Round Top Mountain, gradually pushing myself further each time. It was an arduous process due to the extra weight I had gained and my weakened shins. In the beginning, the pain was unbearable. I even recall a moment when I sat down on a log by the trail, taking Advil to alleviate the discomfort, feeling like a complete failure. However, during one of these hikes, something caught my eye as I looked up the trail. I noticed a log cabin perched on the ridge, exuding a regal and commanding presence, overlooking the valley. In that moment, I made a promise to myself that I would reach that cabin one day and celebrate by drinking from my water bottle, as if it were filled with champagne. That became my summer goal, to make it all the way to that cabin on the ridge. I believed that by that point, my leg would have fully recovered, and I would have regained my normal weight of 190 pounds. For almost the entire month of July, I hiked up Round Top Mountain at least twice a week, noticing incremental improvements with each attempt. Then, one day, it finally happened. I reached the cabin, and the sheer elation I felt was indescribable. However, there was a slight setback. I had consumed all the water in my bottle by the time I arrived, and I still had another hour of hiking back to my truck. So I decided to approach the cabin and see if the owners had an outdoor faucet or some other source of water I could use to refill my bottle. As I got closer, I could hear someone singing from inside the cabin, which eased my nerves a bit. I thought to myself that someone in such a good mood or perhaps a little intoxicated wouldn't turn away a stranger in need of water, especially on such a hot day. With anticipation, I approached the front door of the cabin. The singing continued, growing louder. Later, I discovered it was a song by Jerry Lee Lewis called "She Even Woke Me Up to Say Goodbye." The singing was boisterous, indicating the man inside was either in a good mood or heavily under the influence, or maybe both. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door and introduced myself. To my surprise, there was no response. The door was slightly ajar, something I only noticed after knocking. Feeling a mix of hope and caution, I pushed the door open to get a glimpse inside and perhaps wave to the person. What I saw took me aback. The kitchen and dining room were empty, and the singing was now emanating from the bedroom. The strong smell of alcohol filled the air, but there was another scent, almost metallic, that lingered. Before I could fully process the significance of that smell, the shirtless owner of the cabin emerged from the bedroom, carrying a jug of what appeared to be moonshine or some homemade brew. However, instead of drinking it, he was splashing the liquid all over the floor. When our eyes met, he had a look of sheer panic on his face, instantly making me nervous. As I instinctively began to retreat from the open doorway, I noticed why he appeared so terrified. In the corner of the small room he had emerged from, a woman sat slumped against the wall, her back to it. Above her, a smattering of blood stained the wall, as if she had slid down after being shot or subjected to some other violent act. Without a second thought, my only instinct was to flee. But instead of retracing my steps, which would have made me an easy target had the man pulled out a weapon, I dashed into the trees on the side of the house, seeking cover. It's important to note that my healing leg protested vehemently as I ran. If I had chosen to run along the trail, the man would have had a clear line of sight and the advantage to shoot me down effortlessly, like shooting fish in a barrel. My fears were confirmed when a gunshot echoed behind me, instantly numbing the pain in my leg. Adrenaline surged through my veins, eliminating any thought of pain, and I found myself skidding down the slopes, often on my rear. Eventually, when I felt reasonably safe, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. I informed the police about the situation, the body I discovered, the shot I believed was aimed at me, and the man's intention to set the cabin ablaze. I urged them to arrive swiftly. However, due to the challenging ascent of Round Top, the authorities arrived too late. By the time I hiked back down and returned to my car, I could see smoke billowing from the cabin. I learned the full story when the police came to interview me about what I had witnessed. As it turned out, the man had discovered his wife's infidelity after going through her phone. Consumed by anger, he flew into a rage and shot her. Unfortunately, I had not seen the extent of the tragedy. He had also taken the lives of their 2 children, arranging their bodies on the bed before dousing the cabin with what the authorities believed to be homemade alcohol. The sound of the shot that made me flee was the man taking his own life, right in front of the burning cabin. It was a grim and unsettling tale, with little room for investigation or unanswered questions. It was a clear-cut case of madness that one would prefer to forget. But what if you couldn't forget? What if every time you gazed southward toward the hills, you were reminded of the man's eerie singing, knowing that he had taken his family's lives? I still cannot comprehend how someone could feel so entitled to the lives of their own children, making them victims in a situation that was already disturbing from the start. It has led me to a bleak realization that good things are fleeting, while the memories of tragic events tend to linger far longer than anyone would desire. One of the most terrifying days of my life began when my hiking companion and I stumbled upon a dilapidated hunting cabin in the woods. Its rundown appearance led us to believe it was abandoned, so we saw no harm in exploring it briefly before continuing on our trail. As we entered, it became apparent that the cabin was not deserted at all. The lingering scent of burning wood suggested recent activity, and we discovered scattered food wrappers and torn open first aid supplies. Someone had clearly been there recently. Realizing we were trespassing, we decided it was best to move on and avoid upsetting the owner. However, just as we were about to leave, we heard a faint noise that resembled a person's voice. We froze in our tracks, straining our ears to listen. To our astonishment, we heard a distinct plea for help emanating from beneath the floor. Shocked, we searched for a hatch or an opening and stumbled upon a root cellar outside the cabin. Opening it, we were confronted with a sight that sent chills down our spines: an injured man covered in blood, with what appeared to be a gunshot or stab wound on one of his legs. We immediately asked him what had happened, and his response haunted us deeply. "You have to help me," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "He'll be back soon." It felt like a scene from a horror movie, that stomach-dropping moment when the protagonists realize they have stumbled into grave danger. Except this time, we were the main characters, and the peril was all too real. We were utterly clueless about what to do next. Despite our repeated inquiries about who would return or who had harmed him, the man implored us to get him out of the cellar. His desperate state and palpable fear compelled us to act swiftly. We assisted him in climbing out of the cellar, supporting him with each of his arms draped over our shoulders. Together, we limped back along the trail to the point where we had entered. Miraculously, no one caught up with us, and the person who had inflicted the man's injuries did not pursue us along the trail. Still, throughout our journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment, a knife-wielding maniac might emerge from the woods, hell-bent on taking our lives. We were fortunate enough to flag down a passing truck on one of the park's main roads. Despite the bloodstains he left on the upholstery, the driver kindly rushed the wounded man to the hospital. As it turned out, the man survived, and his assailant was revealed to be his hunting buddy, who had snapped during a trivial argument. It's mind-boggling to think that someone could inflict such harm upon a friend, but stranger things have certainly occurred. Undoubtedly, it was the haunting statement of, "He'll be back soon," that will forever remain etched in my memory. The eerie quality of those words sent shivers down my spine as we hurriedly raced to ensure the injured man's safety. Sometimes, I wonder how close his pursuer truly was. Perhaps if we had arrived a bit earlier or later, the perpetrator might have silenced us as well, ensuring our silence at any cost. When my brother and I were young, our parents faced financial difficulties. My mom had been out of work for over 2 years due to childbirths and taking care of us, while my dad was still at an entry-level position in his career. Despite their hardships, they worked hard to provide for our family. However, they desperately needed a vacation. Given our financial situation, they had to opt for a budget-friendly option. That's how they came across a cheap log cabin in the secluded Cascades, available for just a little over $100 a week. The cabin seemed like a legitimate deal, without any suspicious undertones. Although it had a rustic charm, it was quiet, secluded, and far away from the chaos of Seattle. They made sure it was safe for us, ensuring there were no bodies of water nearby, and then booked it for 5 days in either June or July. Being a nature enthusiast, I was particularly thrilled about the opportunity to immerse myself in the great outdoors. My brother, on the other hand, was easygoing and could find entertainment anywhere. When we arrived at the cabin, we were both excited about the new surroundings, even if it meant sharing a bed in a small one-room cabin. The size or the remoteness didn't bother us. It felt like a real adventure. On the first day after our arrival in the early afternoon, I vividly remember running around the cabin with my mom before she took my brother and me to explore the surrounding area. We had a simple dinner cooked by my dad on the stove using the groceries we bought. We spent the evening playing board games until bedtime. Everything seemed perfect on that first day. However, during the night, I sensed that something was amiss. I woke up to find my dad standing by the small window near the cabin's front door, and my mom was with him, whispering in the dim light. Curious, I asked why Dad was out of bed, which startled them. They explained that he couldn't sleep due to the small bed and wanted Mom to get some rest before he joined her. Their explanation seemed odd to me, as the bed seemed spacious enough for me. Nonetheless, I drifted back to sleep as they continued their whispered conversation. The next morning, my parents appeared visibly worried and stressed as they sat at the table. Although I sensed their unease, I was still excited about our vacation and eager to explore nature. I asked if I could play outside, and they agreed, as long as I stayed within their line of sight from the window. If I couldn't see the window, it meant I had gone too far. As I stepped outside, I noticed a small wooden figurine on the edge of the porch. I picked it up and began playing with it, imagining the tiny figure's adventures in the grass and on the logs. To my surprise, I discovered another figurine sitting on the hood of our car. I rushed to grab it, excited about my newfound toys. My brother joined me outside, sensing that something was wrong with our parents. He mentioned their worried and sad demeanor, which dampened our spirits. We were supposed to have a joyful vacation, a grand adventure. Despite this, I shared the little figures with my brother and invited him to join my play. Unfortunately, a minor scuffle broke out between us as my brother tried to take one of the figurines from my hand. Inevitably, tears followed, and our parents rushed out of the cabin upon hearing our cries. Although I don't recall them rushing out urgently, they later revealed that the sound terrified them, given what had happened the previous night. They asked what caused the argument, and discovered the bone figurines we had been playing with. My dad took the figurines away from us and angrily questioned their origin. He was so upset that my brother started crying too, pointing at me and blaming me for finding them. I was already upset, fearing that we would get in trouble for playing with them. I truthfully told my parents where I found the figurines, not realizing the potential danger. They seemed harmless to me, just little wooden figures. Little did I know they were made of bone. In a rush, my mom and dad whisked us back into the cabin. Their demeanor suddenly changed as they assured us that we were not in trouble. My mom comforted my brother and me, while my dad swiftly packed our belongings into suitcases. He maintained a brave face as he prepared to evacuate us from the cabin. They explained that we had to leave early because my dad needed to return to work, though the exact excuse eludes my memory. They promised that it had nothing to do with us misbehaving and that we could continue playing in our backyard when we got home. I asked if we could take the little figurines with us, but both my parents snapped at me simultaneously, denying my request. Within a short span of 10 to 15 minutes, we were back in the car, heading toward Seattle. The car ride was filled with tension, which persisted throughout the day. However, once we reached our modest backyard, my mom decided to create a nature-themed play session for us. Despite the troubles at the cabin, we managed to have fun watching birds and enjoying a small picnic. The unsettling incidents from the cabin were temporarily forgotten amidst the joys of our impromptu backyard adventure. Fast forward to 20 years later, during the holiday season when my brother and I returned home for Christmas dinner. We sat together in the TV room, reminiscing and engaging in casual conversation. Suddenly, my brother brought up the aborted cabin vacation from our childhood, recalling the strange reaction of our parents to the bone figurines I found. In response, my mom and dad exchanged a significant glance. My mom shook her head, covering her face as if she couldn't bear to recall the whole incident. It was then that my dad decided to disclose the true story of what had transpired during that vacation. As they were drifting off to sleep that night, my dad heard movement outside the cabin. The footsteps were deliberate and cautious, as if the person didn't want to be discovered. Worried, my dad peered out the window, clutching an old kitchen knife, prepared for any intrusion. This incident unnerved both of them, but they didn't want to abandon the vacation they had already paid for and desperately needed. They decided to stay for one more night, intending to leave if the peculiar activity continued. While contemplating their next move, the incident with the bone figurines occurred. They realized that these figurines weren't carved out of wood, but were instead made from bones. My dad, recognizing the texture, deduced that someone who had been outside the previous night must have left them as a mysterious warning. Leaving bone figures on a porch in the middle of the night is hardly a welcoming gesture. Instead of sticking around to find out more, my parents swiftly changed their plans and resolved to leave immediately. My dad understood that confronting someone who carved bone figures as a warning in such a remote location was an unwise decision. Personally, I believe it was a prudent choice, and I admire them for making the difficult decision they did. A few days ago, around July 5th, an unusual series of events began. I received an unexpected call from FedEx around 10 p.m., asking for my name and address, even though they already had that information. Naively, I thought it might be regarding a lost package that had somehow made its way back to my home. In hindsight, I should have realized that FedEx doesn't deliver past 8 p.m. here in Canada. Initially, I didn't think much of it until I received another call from them, stating that they couldn't locate my unit number. They requested that I meet them at the nearby roundabout, which struck both me and my dad as extremely strange. Concerned, my dad decided to investigate the situation and patrol the area. He made 4 laps around the house, but during the first 3 laps, he found nothing unusual. However, on the 3rd lap, he discovered a gray SUV hiding in the corner. He confronted the individuals inside, but they claimed not to be the delivery persons. My dad then went to perform another check, but during his final lap, the SUV had mysteriously vanished. The following day, July 6th, between 6 and 11 p.m., we heard the doorbell ringing. I went downstairs to check, only to find two unfamiliar individuals, approximately in their 20s, waiting outside. Strangely, they knew my name and were calling out to me. Feeling unsafe, I decided not to engage with them and promptly contacted the police. They kept returning repeatedly, which prompted us to involve the authorities. The police advised us to reach out to them if the situation recurred. On July 7th, everything seemed quiet and normal, giving us hope that the worst was behind us. However, on the subsequent day, the eerie silence persisted. As it neared 11 p.m., our security camera captured an individual wearing a mask, seemingly taking photos or videos of our house. This incident was the breaking point, and we immediately reported the suspicious behavior to the police. Just when we thought it was finally over, the night took a chilling turn. Around 3 a.m., while I was casually in the living room, I heard a strange thumping sound coming from the balcony. At first, I dismissed it, assuming it could be anything. But when the sound repeated, I mustered the courage to investigate. To my shock, I found myself face to face with an intruder. Panic-stricken, I screamed for help, and my family rushed downstairs to assess the situation. Thankfully, I had listened to my instincts. Who knows what could have unfolded if I had dismissed the noise as an animal or something harmless. Today is July 9th, and the terror I have experienced has robbed me of sleep. I can't help but wonder if I'm a target of a home invasion. How did they acquire my name in the first place, and why are they subjecting me to this ordeal? An update. Our house was set on fire. I repeat, our house was deliberately set on fire. Fortunately, we all managed to escape unharmed. The police informed me that the attackers threw a Molotov cocktail through the window, but I'm still trying to comprehend the motives behind these events. I'm completely bewildered, and if any new developments arise, I will certainly keep you informed.